Hi, welcome to Garden City Church KL Online. We hope this message equips you and gives you encouragement to live out your faith boldly and practically. If you want to learn more about our church, visit our website at www.gardencitykl.com or click the link in the description below.
Well, good morning and welcome to Garden City. Normally we'd have the lights on. Love to see your beautiful faces. I was just told that a fuse blew, and so they're going to get that worked out, but please don't mind that. I want to say to all of our first time, all of our seasoned, all of our spiritual moms out there, whether you're new or old, you've been at this a long time, happy Mother's Day. We want to say happy Mother's Day to all of you. I just want to say on behalf of the rest of us, thank you for all of the tireless work that you do day in and day out to make all of our lives work and run and function. We would not be the same without you. If you have ever thought, what would these people do without me? Well, I can just say we don't want to find out. You know, we are so thankful for you, and so you are a gift, you are a delight to the Lord, you are a blessing to all of us. Happy Mother's Day. I just want to especially get that out of the way because our text this morning is not a very Mother's Day friendly text. And so, again, happy Mother's Day. If you have a Bible, I would love to invite you to meet me in 1 Samuel 5. 1 Samuel chapter 5. Years ago, I coached a middle school soccer team, and they were fine. They were fine. They weren't great. They weren't bad. They were fine. There's nothing wrong with being fine. Meanwhile, the best team in the league, they were called the Voyagers, which is just a great name for a good team. And they were a great team. I mean, they were so good that they would make you hate playing the game of soccer sometimes. They would just crush everybody that they played. Well, when the Voyagers came to town, you felt a little sick inside. And our boys were no different. They were terrified to play them, and who could blame them, right? Nobody likes getting crushed. Well, I'm not sure what was going on in the Voyagers' huddle before the game, but the whole first half, we were competitive, which is all you could ask for. I mean, we came in at halftime, you'd think we'd won the game. It was 0-0, but it felt like we were on top. What was even crazier is that we actually looked like the better team. And so as our boys came in at halftime, I said, look, guys, I know that this team has crushed everybody. I know what kind of season that they're having, but I can tell you right now, they have never been in a moment like this where they have had to play a tight game. All the pressure is on them, and so I want us to go into the second half and just bring it to them. Like, this is our game. Now, normally in this kind of situation, when you have a sleeping giant on the other side, eventually they wake up. They realize, hey, we are way better than these guys, and we crush them. But that is not what happened this day. On this day, our guys went out there, and they actually beat them. It was one of the greatest, one of the most satisfying victories I've ever gotten to be a part of. Our boys were so excited as they left the field that day. Now, on another day, that same team beats us 10-0. But we don't need to hear that story. We need to hear the first story. But see, that's also why you should always have a healthy fear of your opponent. It would be a mistake to forget who you're up against and what they're capable of. And that's the mistake that the Philistines had made. See, last week we heard how the Israelites brought the Ark of God into their camp before battle, as if God were some kind of good luck charm, and that having His presence in their camp would mean their victory. And on paper, the Philistines, they didn't stand a chance. But whatever was going on in the Israelite huddle that day, it did not work for them, because the Philistines came in and they beat them, and they took the Ark of God with them. But the Philistines, they left thinking that the victory over Israel meant the victory over Israel's God, that he had somehow been defeated. And they could not have been more wrong. And the Ark of God, it was not the trophy that they thought it was. See, 1 Samuel tells a story about the sovereignty of God. But it's also a story about us and all the ways we serve broken idols instead of bowing the knee to the Lord. And so pick up with me in verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1. It says, when the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon. Now, the Philistines, they were originally afraid of God. They had heard how the Lord had brought devastation on the people of Egypt when Israel was enslaved to Egypt, how they had brought all these plagues and how God had conquered them and rescued his people from slavery. And so they think that victory in battle means that they defeated this great God. Just like we assume when things don't go our way, that God must have failed us. He must have fallen short, which is a very pragmatic way of looking at religion. We've all heard stories of people accusing God of being weak because of what he could have done, but he failed to do. Some ongoing hardship, some unanswered prayer. And do you know why we do that? Because the gods we make always look like us. We always craft gods into our image. And what does that say about us? I mean, we constantly are judging ourselves based on how useful we are. I mean, just think about it. How much of your mood this past week could be measured by how productive you were? I was at a pastor's retreat in the U.S. all last week. We landed back in KL on Thursday morning, and I have been feeling so jet-lagged ever since. In the meantime, I had done very little to nothing of this sermon. And so on Friday morning, I could feel the stress of, man, something's got to happen on like today or tomorrow because Sunday is coming. And so I was feeling the weight and the stress of all that. I started praying to God, God, make me productive and give me clear thoughts, because if you don't show up here, like this is not happening. Like it was that level of desperation as I was walking to work on Friday morning. I didn't feel effective. I didn't feel productive. I felt down. I felt stressed. Or how about the parents in the room? Like how many parents said this week, I'm a bad parent because something I'm doing just is not working. Like I know the work I'm putting in, and I see the product, and I'm like, man, I don't like my parenting is not parenting so good, and my kids need to be parented, or they need to move out, or something. Like something needs to change. I mean, we base our lives on how useful we are all the time. Well, we do the same thing with God. We say, all I want is for God to do what I want, when I want, how I want, and then he needs to mind his own business. He needs to kind of get out of the way, because that's what his purpose is. But when God refuses to play that role, we start wondering, well, what good is he? What's he for? And that helps explain the Philistines' attitude toward God here. See, if the Philistines had heard how great God is, how he had done all these amazing things, why don't they just turn and worship him? Seems like a funny thing to ask after they just beat God in battle. Why would they need to worship him? He's inferior to their gods. They don't worship God because, like us, we want to worship the gods that work. We want to worship the gods that work. From the Philistines' point of view, they didn't need God because they had already had gods that they trusted in. And so far, that's worked out for them. Dagon was this great god. He was the father of Baal, the top god in the pantheon of gods. He was the god of the harvest. And every season, the crops came in. So why do they need to change? I mean, the Philistines could have sang songs about how their gods never fail. And I mean, religion, it makes so much sense when it's practical. Like if I do these rituals, the gods will provide these needs. Like I'll worship a God if he works. If it works, that's great. I'll do that. And honestly, people still think like that today. You know, maybe you're here this morning thinking, man, Christians, they make such a big deal about worshiping Jesus. But what does he have to offer me that I don't already have? Now, I've seen this level of rejection play out in two different directions. First, there's those who reject Jesus because he doesn't work for them. He doesn't fit their lifestyle. He doesn't fit what they've already grown up in. I mean, there's people who've grown up in cultures and in families who would say, we worship what we're born into. There's many ways to know the truth. If you find truth in Jesus, that's great for you. But I find truth through other ways, through other traditions, through other gods. Plus, worshiping Jesus, it just is impractical for me because it would mean giving up everything I've come to know and love. My family would disown me. I'd lose my culture. I'd have to go against the values my whole life is built on. And I've had a good life. So why would I give those things up? But then there's a second category of people who reject Jesus. And they can be just as difficult to minister to the gospel to reach with the gospel as the first group. And that's people who find Jesus useful, but not beautiful. And these people call themselves Christians when they're really not. I mean, I've encountered so many people who call themselves Christians because they were born into a Christian family. They were raised going to the church. They did lots of Christian-y type things. And so they said, because I do these things, that is what makes me a Christian. But they've never lived a life of surrender to the Lord. Like they've never given their hearts over to Jesus. And so when life gets hard, when following Jesus becomes unpopular, or when they no longer benefit from being associated with Christianity, they just abandon it. They leave. But the truth is, you can't walk away from something you never gave your life to in the first place. See, both groups of people base their worship of God on how functional He is in their life. One rejects Jesus because their life works without Him. The other rejects Jesus because He no longer serves the same purpose in their life. They have no need for Him anymore. See, we want to worship the gods that work. Well, the antidote to functional worship like this is beholding God for who He is. See, God is a relational God. He wants us to relate to Him based on who He is. And what He's revealed to us, He's the Lord our God. He's gracious and merciful. He's slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. All of life is defined by how we relate to this God. And He's kind enough to show us that our lives don't work without Him. See, the Philistines, they don't think they need God. That's why they put the ark of God in Dagon's house. What can this God do that the mighty Dagon can't? But they don't really know the Lord, and it shows. Like they have no idea this God that they have in their midst. And He's about to show them. Verse 3. And so when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. Now, isn't it funny that when God gets put in the house of someone else's God, He humiliates it? Just saying, verse 4. But when they rose early on the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. Now we worship what works, but what happens when our gods fail? See, the Dagons of the world have a way of making us believe that we can't live without them. That's why even when our gods break, we still want to serve them. This brings us to number 2. False gods don't just fail us, they expose us. They show us what's really there, what's really going on. It shows us the brokenness that's really present in our lives. See, when you compare the gods we create with the God who made everything, I mean, there really is no comparison. It would be like trying to compare a stick figure drawing to the Sistine Chapel. I mean, they're just not in the same category. Now, Dagon, he's supposed to be this great god of the Philistines, but with no effort at all, God makes him bow down before him, like knocks him down to the ground, makes him bow in worship of God. And Dagon, see, he's so weak, his worshipers have to prop him back up. The next day it happens again. They're like, man, we got to get these youth groups out of the temple. You got to stop playing around. But this time the head of Dagon and the hands of Dagon are broken off. Now, there's no wisdom without the head, and there's no power without the hands. See, false idols, they're useless. They don't work the way that we think they do. They don't work the way we need them to. But notice that the response isn't to stop worshiping Dagon. It's not even to turn and worship the Lord. They just stop using that part of the temple. They're like, well, this seems to be not a very good scene here to have our God with his head and his hands on the ground. So we're going to ignore that part. We're going to come over here. We'll worship Dagon over here. But they never think to turn and worship the Lord. And honestly, that's what we do when our idols fail us. We don't stop worshiping them. We keep trying to prop them back up in our lives. See, the problem with idols is that we think they'll serve us, but eventually we end up serving them. And over time, we become just as broken as they are. I learned that the hard way several years ago. I've mentioned before, if you've been around the church, how God did some incredible work in my life when I was a university student. I gained so much during those 4 years. I learned so much. But I think just as important as what God gave is what he took away. See, during those early days, God was burdening my heart for the nations. And he was opening my mind to overseas work, to the point that I was becoming convinced that I was going to go do overseas ministry work in some way, in some capacity, at some point in my life. But at the time, I was seriously dating this girl. Let's call her Not Sarah, because that's my wife's name. And so, Not Sarah and I had been dating for years, and I honestly thought things were going really well. I thought things were going to work out between us. But when I started talking to her about the potential of going overseas one day, she did not feel the same way. She actually seemed to be upset that I would even consider something like that. Now, I probably should have taken that as a sign that things weren't going to work out. But instead, I started reshaping God's calling around this relationship. Now, if I could go back and counsel myself, I would have said, dude, you need to serve God and not man, even when it's hard. You need to come with a posture of openness and surrender, and you need to be willing to lay aside the things, even when it hurts. But in the moment, I just had no idea how that relationship had become a functional idol in my life. And so God took it away. I mean, within months, it was over. It happened so fast, it felt like whiplash. I mean, I was just stunned. I couldn't believe it. But you know what my first thought was after everything fell apart? How can I get it back? How can I prop this up again in my life? So the failure of false gods, it reveals a lot about us. It's not just that they're broken and don't work. Their failures show us that we're broken. We don't just want them to work, we need them to work. We need them to fix us. We need them to satisfy the longings of our hearts and the things in our lives that they just can't do. I mean, what broken idols do you keep propping up to worship in your life? I mean, just insert any other false god into your life, like sex, marriage, money, fame, influence, family. It's all the same story. They all run the same play. Like any idol you serve will punish you when you fail and require even more of you when you succeed. And even when you do get what you want, it is never enough. The more you gain, the more you have to sacrifice, the more exhausted you become. See, everybody has their own little gods that they turn to for security, for identity, for hope, for purpose, for worth. And even when these false gods fail, we run back to them because we need them to work. But we give them a level of weight that they can't sustain, and eventually they break. Eventually we break. But this sets up the contrast of the whole chapter. See, where Dagon has no head and no hands, the Lord is said to have heavy hands And in verse 6, the weight of his hands shifts from our idols to us. In verse 6, it says, the hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? Now, back in chapter 4, the Israelites, they had the presence of God. They had God's presence in their camp. Now, they were wrong to presume that God's presence would guarantee that he would do whatever they wanted. Like, don't do that. You don't get to manipulate God into doing what you want. That's not who he is. That's not how he works. Just because you do the rituals, like you pray the prayers, you sing the songs, you give your money, that does not obligate God to you. That does not force him to serve you. That's not how he works. I mean, who do you think he is? That's why God's presence left them. But here the Philistines, they have the presence of God with them, and the presence of God is the problem. That's why they start playing hot potato with the ark of God. They're like, we can't handle this. Second half of verse 8 says, they answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. So they brought the ark of the God of Israel there. But after they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city, causing a very great panic. And he afflicted the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But as soon as the ark of God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, they have brought around to us the ark of the God of Israel to kill us and our people. They sent therefore and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people. For there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was very heavy there. Now here's what's going on here. Like the presence of God becomes a terror wherever he goes. Wherever the ark of God is, people are experiencing tumors, they're getting sick, they're going into panic, people are dying. Now, why is being in the presence of God such a big problem? Well, because number 3, God's presence brings judgment to those who oppose him. They were feeling the weight of God's judgment upon them. Now, let's just imagine for a moment that the ark of God came to Ampang. Ark of God is now here in Ampang, in our part of the city, and everybody in Ampang gets sick. Tumors all over our bodies. We're all feeling uncomfortable. We're unwell. Yeah, everybody experiences this. Like there is a direct cause and effect relationship between God's presence and our sickness. And we're like, man, we got to do something about this. So what do? We have a town hall meeting. We call everybody together, and we all decide it's in our best interest to hire Lala Move and to ship the Ark of God over to Damansara. We're like, let's send it over there. And when it comes to Damansara, everybody from young to old gets sick, just like the people in Ampang. And the people in Damansara are like, yeah, this thing can't stay here either. Let's ship this thing over to PJ. I bet this will work in PJ. And the same thing happens in PJ. So the people in PJ are like, let's send it over to Taras. You know, I know some people in Bandar Sri Permaisuri who would love to take this thing off our hands. Let's send it over there. Let's let them deal with it. And as the ark is making its way over to Taras, the news about what is happening with the ark has reached the entire city. And so as coming to Taras, people are starting to protest in the streets. They're like blockading the roads. They're blocking Lala Move from coming in. They're like, the presence of the ark of God is not allowed here. Like, what are you trying to do? You want to kill us? Like, it cannot come in. We need to get the presence of God out of our city. We need to get the presence of God out of Malaysia because nobody is safe here with it here. And this is the problem with a relational God. He is who he is. You don't get to change him. You don't get to control him. You don't get to make God in your image. Either he makes you into his, or you feel crushed by the weight of his hand. See, the Philistines are experiencing what it's like for the first time to be proximate to a God who has real power, who has real authority, who has say over that, who's the judge over all. And what do? They send him away. And they send him away. They say, get out of here. We cannot be in the presence of God. He is too great for us. He's too much for us. His hand is too heavy for us. Well, what about you? What's your heart posture toward the presence of God? Is he a welcome presence in your life or not? Because it's an all or nothing kind of thing. I mean, you can't have part of God. You have either all or nothing. See, I fear that many of us assume that we can limit God's control in our lives. They say, he can have say in my parenting, but he better not touch my marriage. He can have say in my job, but he doesn't get to decide how I spend my money. Now, I'll serve God on Sunday morning, but he better not ask anything of me for the rest of the week, because that's mine. I gave him his, this is mine. And I just think, do we really know the Lord? Do we really know him? Who do you think he is? I don't want any of us to leave this morning not having the chance to encounter the glory and the terror of this great God for themselves. How dare we approach the living God and leave unmoved? See, one of the best ways to know God is by listening to his word, listening to who he has revealed himself to be. And so let's just take a moment right here to do that. Can we put Psalm 115 on the screen for us? I'm just going to leave this up here for a moment. Psalm 115:1 says, "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory for the sake of your steadfast love and your faithfulness. Why should the nations say, 'Where is their God?' Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases." I just want us to sit with that for a moment. Take that in. Do you feel the weight of those words? What kind of God does that sound like to you? Does that sound like a weak God? Does that sound like a God who bends to your every wishes? Read it again. "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory, for the sake of your steadfast love and your faithfulness." Who gets the glory? Who gets the praise in all the earth? See, when God shows up, the whole world notices. He has that kind of aura. He has that kind of presence. Do you know this God? Read it again. Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases. Who gets their way? Us or him? Is that good news to you, or is that to your dread? God does whatever he pleases for the sake of his love and his faithfulness. That is who he is. That's the God that we've come to worship this morning. Or how about this? Let's put Psalm 32 up there. Psalm 32 in verse 2, it says, "Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer." Do you feel the weight of those words? Let me ask you this. Do you sound more like the blessed man whom the Lord counts no wrongs against? Or like the man who's wasting away under the heavy hand of God? See, that's the experience of the Philistines. The Lord's heavy hand of judgment was upon them, and it would not lift itself up. The weight felt too great for them, and they just could not stand it. This unbearable weight with no relief. And that's the experience of every sinner who stands before a holy God. I mean, that's not a problem you just send away. It doesn't go away like that. But in the psalm, the blessed man and the broken man are the same man. Right? But how do we escape the judgment of God's heavy hand? We stop pushing him away and you start to believe what he's saying. You start to take him in. See, verse 5 of Psalm 32 says, I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. See, the presence of God is a terror to any person or place where he's resisted. But he becomes a refuge and strength to any person or place where he's received. That's why, number 4, the only safety we find from God's judgment is in God himself. See, the answer to God's judgment isn't to run away from him or to push him away. It's much more counterintuitive than that. The solution is to actually surrender to him. And that's the one thing the Philistines would not do. Their solution was to get rid of God. And honestly, that's often what we try to do too. Like when someone challenges the way that we're living, when we're walking in sin, when we're walking out of step with what God's called us to, we try to avoid those people like the plague. Like we don't want their voices of correction in our lives because we don't want to change. But the invitation of the gospel is to run to God in Christ. See, if you look at the final verse in chapter 5, in verse 12, it says, the men who did not die were struck with tumors. And so you have all this terror happening, all this panic. People are dying left and right. They cannot stand the presence of God. And it says, the cry of the city went up to heaven. The cry of the city went up to heaven. Now, I take that to mean our God is a God who hears. He hears all the cries of this broken world. Now, crying out to God says a lot about who you think he is. Like, how do you expect God to treat sinners desperate for a Savior? What kind of God is he? That will determine whether or not you cry out to him. Now, what we find throughout the Bible is that when people cry out to this God, he responds with mercy and rescue. That's what happened in the book of Exodus. When the people were slaves in Egypt, in Exodus 2, it says, the people groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. And their cries reached the heavens, and God heard, and he knew, and he came to them, and he brought salvation for them. He made a way for them. And in these last days, he's worked to save us by sending his son Jesus. See, just like the Philistines, we stand under the heavy hand of God's judgment because of our sin. It's a weight that none of us can lift ourselves. We can't just push it away. We can't ignore it. But listen, just like we talked about last week, how God's glory departed his people. But here, the same word that means heavy in the text is the same word that means glory. That these heavy hands turn into God's glory hands. And God makes his glory known in all the earth by letting the full weight of our sin fall upon himself. See, this is the work of the mighty hand of God, that in his death and resurrection, Jesus overcomes the weight. He overcomes the weight of sin. That what brings God the most glory in is his power to heal those who could not save themselves. Way before we ever thought about welcoming God into our lives, he did everything necessary to welcome us into his. See, Jesus is not some functional God that breaks over time. He's not some God that needs like a new upgrade. No, he's the only God who could ever save, and he does. That's why Romans 10 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all. No distinction between Israelite or Philistine or anything else. But he bestows his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Listen, if you're tired of empty religion, if you're weary from running away from the Lord, the invitation this morning is to call upon the name of the Lord and be saved, to find rest, to find healing, to find salvation. See, these broken idols, they take and they take and they take until they run us dry. We feel empty. We feel exhausted. But when we learn to surrender to the Lord, He gives and He gives and He gives. He fills us up, and then He sends us out to make His glory known to those who would otherwise send Him away. It reminds me of the story in Mark 5, where Jesus comes and heals a demon-possessed man. Jesus sends the legion of demons into a herd of pigs that gets drowned into the sea, which is a lot of money lost in that transaction. Like, that's probably somebody's idol that just got drowned at sea. And so all the people, they start going to Jesus and they're like, we want you to leave. Please get out. Please get out. And so Jesus does. But as he's on his way out, as he's boarding the boat, the man who'd been set free comes to him and begs Jesus to go with him. But Jesus tells him, no, I want you to stay here. To go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. So the man went and told the people who drove Jesus away all that He had done for him. And everyone marveled. They marveled at the work of Jesus in this man's life. And Jesus says to us, now, I want you to do the same thing in the places that I am sending you. Go and make people marvel at God's ability to lift the weight of sin from their lives so that the presence of God would be welcomed in this city.